All right. Hey, team. Welcome to Colbyashi and Maru. I'm Colby Fayok, your host and coordinator of today's challenge. This is the show where web devs all over the world boldly face off against the most logical tools of the web. Today, we have Mahmoud Abdelwahab. Mahmoud is a developer advocate at Prisma. He's also an egghead instructor and has a YouTube channel that you should go and check out. So let's bring him in. Hey, Mahmoud, do you want to give your quick intro about yourself or, add on to anything that I said?
No, everything is right. I actually pronounced my name correctly. So damn, that's nice. But yeah, I personally, I like doing talks. I like creating content, meeting new people and kind of challenging myself. So that's why I'm here. It's super exciting. I'm super excited to kind of share with you something new and hopefully you learn something. We'll be working with Next.js and Prisma. They're a really nice combo, but I will show you that it's kind of not the only way to use Prisma and how it fits in your stack. But yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, so if you're new to Colbyashi Maru, our guest, Mahmoud, will have 1 hour to complete the project. Through that time, he'll try to talk out loud as he's working, and I'll also try to ask some questions. If anybody has any questions, make sure you send them over in chat, and I'll definitely field them to Mahmoud. Like he said, he'll be facing off today against full stack serverless with Prisma and Next.js, and he'll be building a contact management application complete with a serverless API. If he doesn't finish the challenge, all is not lost. We'll see if we have enough time to finish up at the end. Otherwise, we'll kind of just chat about what the next steps would be. Do you want to just talk a really quick about Prisma and Next.js before we dive in?
Okay, so Next.js is a full stack React framework. I will kind of just give an introduction. It has tons of cool features, but mainly there are two main features that we'll be using throughout this demo. The first one is get server-side props. It's a function in Next.js that allows you to do data fetching server-side. So we'll be actually able to make a call to our database using Prisma, and pass this data as props to our React component and just render it. So that's really nice. And also Next.js has this awesome feature and it's API routes. So it has a pages directory. I'll be talking more in detail while I'm building. You have this API folder, and basically it allows you to have to build a REST API within the same project. So it's really nice. And these endpoints, inside of these endpoints will kind of make our CRUD functionality. And also this app is kind of just a fancier to-do app. Instead of just having a single field, which is the to-do item, it will be kind of multiple fields. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you're ready to get started, I am. I'll switch over to the presentation view, and if you're ready, I will count down and we'll get the timer started.
Okay.
Cool.
Let's
go.
go.
We'll go in 3, 2, 1. You're on.
Okay. Hopefully, my screen is clear. I don't have anything set up. We're starting from absolute scratch. So using Next.js. So first thing, I will just create a Next.js project using create next app. This is Next.js CLI. It takes as an argument the name of the app. I will just call it contacts app. Very nice name. And while that's setting up, I'd like to talk about kind of Next.js in general. I'm a big fan of the framework because it's a full stack framework. So everything can just live in the same project. And I actually wanted to show you, I'll do a bit of talking before actually getting into coding while things are just setting up. So first of all, Next.js, two main features that I really enjoy is that you can actually do data fetching server side. I'll be showing you how to do that, and API routes. So if you go to just nextjs.org, if you haven't used it, they have great documentation. And in the API routes, we'll be handling the authentication part using NextAuth if we have time. And also kind of the CRUD functionality. This is Next.js. And also we'll be working with TypeScript. So first, let me cd into this directory, contacts app,
TypeScript
and code dot. Yeah, so TypeScript. At Prisma, we're big fans of TypeScript because it has a ton of benefits. So with TypeScript, you actually get type safety. So it's a lot less likely that you make errors. Kind of like, say for example, you have a function and this function takes 3 parameters. You pass 2 parameters, you will get unexpected behavior. So with TypeScript, you actually, like, TypeScript will just scream at you and tell you like, no, hold up, what are you doing? You actually should pass like 3 arguments. And at the same time, it has great development experience because you actually get great auto-completion. And with Prisma, you actually get kind of like a client that is type safe. So say, for example, you want to create a new entry in your database. Like, I will talk more in detail about what Prisma is and what we do. But say, for example, you want to create a new entry in your database and you're not using a type safe client. What might happen is you might pass the wrong type and save that in your database, for example, or maybe forget about a certain field. So using TypeScript really helps, and we're going to get more into that. But first, let's set up Next.js. Now, Next.js already supports TypeScript, so it's really nice. So all we need to do is actually just create a tsconfig.json. And if we actually just do like yarn dev, it will say it detects TypeScript. Like, it says, it looks like you're trying to use TypeScript, but you do not have the required packages installed. So all we need to do is just copy and paste this command. We're installing TypeScript as a development dependency with the types for React and the types for Node. So let's do that.
Is that error coming from Next.js because Next.js?
Yeah, they detected. Yeah, it says it detected the tsconfig.json file. So it says, okay, you want to use TypeScript, but it looks like you haven't installed the correct dependencies. So just do that. So it's really nice like experience. Yeah. And let's, for example, test it and go to our app.js. Now, since this is a TypeScript project, we will just change the extension to .tsx, and everything should just work normally. And if we also rename this index.js to index.tsx, and if we run yarn dev, everything should work without any problems. It says, okay, it's live at localhost 3000. It's showing lots of red lines. Oh yeah, it says like, we detected TypeScript for you, and they actually filled the tsconfig.json because I haven't written anything inside it, but they were like, okay, here's a cool tsconfig for you. So it's just a really nice experience from Next.js, to be honest. And yeah, it says, welcome to Next.js. Now, a cool thing that is not necessary, but I love to use, is Tailwind CSS. So for you of those who don't know what Tailwind CSS is, let me bring up their website. It is like a CSS framework for you to build your UI. It uses utility classes. Now, what are utility classes? They are single purpose classes that do only one thing. Because say, for example, you want to style this heading, maybe you would have a class called heading, and you would kind of add multiple classes for the font size, the line height, the max width, etc. With Tailwind, it's a bit different. What you would do is add multiple single purpose classes to actually create this. Now, I'm not going to kind of like compare different approaches to CSS, but the reason that I'm a big fan of Tailwind is that it comes with great defaults. So the Tailwind team like sat down and thought about kind of like everything from like color values to spacing, margins. And what happens is you kind of have this limited number of CSS classes. So what happens is you really can't exceed that number as your project scales. And when you actually get really good at Tailwind and you kind of like know all of these classes, it becomes very fast for you to kind of like prototype and build using this tool. So actually the setup for Tailwind in Next.js is also really nice. All we need to do is install 3 packages. We need to install Tailwind CSS. And we also need, I'd say you add latest, because they always do that in the documentation, and post CSS at latest, and auto prefixer. Like, auto prefixer is the package that kind of like generates the vendor prefixes for different browsers. So you get kind of like the maximum possible compatibility, because CSS can be kind of like broken if you use different browsers. It's kind of like a bit frustrating, but they took care of that. And I'll install them as development dependencies.
It's so nice that as developers, we don't have to think about that like we used to.
Yeah, like honestly, like once we're actually finished with this whole setup, you'll actually see just kind of like how kind of like spoiled a little bit we are, because we have like these great tools that are just for free and you kind of like build with them. So like it's super exciting. So anyway, Tailwind requires two things for it to work with Next.js. We need a Tailwind config file. This is kind of like where we configure Tailwind. I'm just going to use kind of like the full configuration. And we also need a post.css file, because Tailwind is a post.css plugin. So all we need to do is just use their CLI, and we can say npx Tailwind CSS init -- full. This will kind of generate everything, because you can actually configure it from scratch. So like it's very flexible. And then -p, this also generates the post.css file. So it says, okay, I created a Tailwind config file and a post.css config file. Now, if you go to Tailwind config, you'll see this long file with lots and lots of CSS classes and configurations. You may be worried, okay, but like I might not use all of this. Why would I be shipping it? And it actually comes with purging built in. So you can actually kind of like remove any unused classes that you do not use. Now, I suck at actually this snippet, so I have it right here, where it kind of like specify the different directories. So yeah, this works. And as you can see, we're purging CSS in any file in the pages directory and in the components directory, which
So
will actually I should create.
So
yeah,
it'll
we'll go
through
all
those files. Yeah.
Yeah, and just remove any unused CSS. So this way, actually, the bundle size will be really small. So
That's
say I want to create a components directory, because we'll be needing that. And yeah, that's actually it for Tailwind. I also like to include a cool plugin for Tailwind, and -dev, and it's
pretty easy to set
at
up, though.
Tailwind CSS. Yeah, and it's the typography plugin. It's commonly used for like blogs, because with Tailwind, you'll see that they actually remove the styling from everything, so that when you slap classes on like elements, you don't have kind of like any extra margin, any extra padding or anything. So it's kind of like just nothing, just raw HTML without anything. But yeah, actually, for us to add Tailwind, there's just one final step, and it's to add it in our Tailwind CSS file. Like we actually need to include the directives. I think that's what they're called, like Tailwind.css. Right. Yeah. And all we need to do is just say add Tailwind base, add Tailwind components, and add Tailwind.
But this is kind of like importing those different utilities from Tailwind itself.
Yeah, like using post.css, what happens is it will go through, oh, okay, you want to include these. And what will happen is you get kind of like all like the actual CSS for the different utility classes. Because at the end of the day, the browser only understands CSS. It doesn't understand like Tailwind. But yeah, so we don't need this globals.css and home.module.css files. And what we need to do is actually import the CSS file here. So now we will actually have access to Tailwind. So let's test the index route. Let's remove all of this stuff. We don't need it. Let's change the title actually to contacts app, because I haven't figured out like a cooler name.
Suitable.
And let's remove, and let's like remove the styles. We don't need it. We should get like errors. Let's remove this main and the footer. Everything should work. And for testing, I like to add just an h1, say hello world, whatever, and then go add a class of text 6XL and text red 500. So like this way, when I actually run the project, I can just see, okay, now Tailwind is configured properly. So now everything is cool. And it should load successfully, I believe. There shouldn't be any, yeah, it's still loading, like the server is starting it up. We should have like this elevator music until like it compiles. But yeah, as you can see, everything just works. And yeah, like now our Tailwind CSS is configured. And now the next step, kind of like I wanted to talk about what Prisma is and where it fits in like your architecture. So I actually have a diagram prepared. It's this. So you guys can see it. Everything is cool, right? Okay, so as you can see, this is kind of like the traditional web application architecture. If you're a front-end developer, you probably worked with a front-end framework. Maybe it's React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, whatever. And what happens is you talk to an API. So like you communicate with the server through an API. An API can be either a REST API. So you have multiple endpoints, you talk to an endpoint, and each endpoint is responsible for doing some sort of logic. Maybe it's creating something, updating something, deleting something. And also another approach for you to build an API is GraphQL. GraphQL is super interesting. What happens with GraphQL is instead of having multiple endpoints, you have a single endpoint. You ask, like in your query, you specify exactly what data you need, and it returns only the data that you want. So it kind of solves some of the problems that REST has, but also it also comes with like its own trade-offs because no tool is kind of like perfect, unfortunately. And yeah, like you would use, if you're using GraphQL, you would use like a GraphQL client. So something like Urkel or Apollo client. They're interesting tools. And now this is all fine with when you're working on the front end, but on the back end, like behind the scenes, what happens is you have your server and you have your database. This is when you want to persist data. Say, for example, you want data about the user. You want data, for example, in our demo, we want to store data about the contacts app. We want each user to be able to kind of create new contacts and maybe potentially like delete them and update them. But yeah, so like in this layer, what happens is at each database, there are different types of databases. So for example, at a MongoDB, there's DynamoDB. There's kind of like the family of SQL. You have MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, SQLite, PostgreSQL. And each one of these databases has its own kind of like pros and cons and its own trade-offs, and it's kind of built for a certain thing. But for you to actually communicate with the database, there are multiple ways for you to do that. So for example, you can actually just use the database's querying language. So in the context of Postgres, that's the database that we'll be using, you can actually just send raw SQL queries, but there's only one problem. First, the development experience. You would send strings of queries to your database. So that's kind of an issue because you'd be editing strings. There's no like auto completion or anything. And also, you can actually be vulnerable to SQL injections. So simply explained, someone can just send a query to your database, kind of like destroy everything or like drop it. That's why you kind of always need to like sanitize your inputs, make sure that no one tries to like hack you.
And a quick question in
Yeah,
here: Does
sure.
Prisma have MongoDB support?
That's actually coming soon. Like, don't take my word for it. I believe it's like in Q1. Just like I don't get anyone's hopes up.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, but like we're planning we're working on like a MongoDB connector. Like so far we only support PostgreSQL, SQLite, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server. So yeah, if you want to use any of these, you can. But yeah, MongoDB is coming pretty soon. So many people are like excited for it and they can't wait to use it. But yeah, so like Prisma, and like very simply explain, what we do is we make working with databases easy. So what happens, I already mentioned that you can work with, for example, like Postgres with raw SQL. That's not really the best experience because what happens is it's not very productive. Like there's a lot of context switching. So you're working with two different languages, your programming language. So say, for example, you're working with Node.js. What happens is you're using JavaScript, but then you have to kind of shift your mindset about like how you're building and you're working with a database because you'd have to use SQL. So kind of another solution that is a bit better than using just the database's native querying language is to use a query builder. So Next.js, not Next, is used to kind of like build your query. You use kind of like different statements. Each statement kind of like it's a query builder because it's kind of like you're also writing SQL, but it's like using code and it then generates the SQL queries. So it's a bit better than just using the database's native querying language, but also you're still thinking in SQL. So that's kind of like why, like what we do. We think about like databases a bit differently, and I'm going to show you how. So in simple terms, with Prisma, you are able to actually interact with the database. So you want to create new data, fetch existing data, update existing data, or delete something. You would use Prisma to actually do these things. What's called Prisma Client, and that's how you actually interact with the database. For example, there are also things like pagination you can do. You can also do like filtering when like you're talking, like you're making the database call. But yeah, so now you understand where Prisma fits in your stack. Technically speaking, with Next.js is like all of this combined in just a single project. Like it's fascinating because you have your front end, which you use React to build like your different components, but also you get server-side rendering. So not get into too many details, what happens with just vanilla React, what happens is you have client-side rendering. So you're rendering content using JavaScript. This had some pros and cons. Like the pros were you get kind of like a fast and snappy experience when people visit your app. But at the same time, it's a bit slow for like the first time because you need to load your entire bundle. But like Next.js with server-side rendering gives you like great performance, great SEO because it renders like first your page on the server and then sends it. And then kind of like there's this process and it's called hydration where it makes the page interactive. So like it's a bit too many like too detailed about Next.js, but like, I'm a big fan. But yeah, so like as you can see, the API here, we won't be using anything. Like I already set up the Next.js project. This inside the pages directory. First of all, Next.js has this awesome feature and it's file-based routing. So each file is automatically a route. So this index, so like this index file is like the route that is just like the home page. But say, for example, we want to create, I don't know, an about page where we kind of discuss more about the project. And I just use this shortcut. Actually, there's no need for us to import React. That's also something that's so cool about Next. And
what was
we just
that shortcut?
say, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, RAFC. It's like React.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like React arrow function component. Like there's this cool extension. I'll share it with you later. But yeah, like say hello from about. And yeah, if I save this, I go to, again, localhost 3000. And I just say /about. And should work, hello from about. So it works, but we won't be doing any of this like right now. So anyway, back to topic because like I keep kind of like digressing.
Just so you know, we have about 41 minutes left.
Wow, time flies. Okay, so for Prisma, now there's something that I want you to kind of understand. For Prisma, we first need a database. So the first thing I want to do is create a Postgres database. So Heroku is really nice because it's kind of like simple to just spin up a Postgres database. So it's nice. There are other ways, and we have actually tons of guides if you want to check them out using like Docker, and you can actually just set up a local Postgres database. But I just personally like using Heroku. So I will create an app name, so I can call it Contacts App. Pretty sure it's taken, so let's call it Awesome Contacts App. Okay, that's not taken. And let me change like the region to Europe because like that's closer to me. And we also authenticate. Okay, let's see. Come on. Okay, everything works. So what we need to do is actually pretty simple. We would just go to resources and search in like the add-ons section and just say Postgres, and you have Heroku Postgres. And this is like the free version. We don't need to pay any money. I don't want to pay any money for like databases right now. And yeah, and what I did is just kind of like here to configure it because we're going to need this. We're going to get the database credentials. So for us to access the database, we need a URL. But yeah, so like I just set this up for now. Let's go back to our text editor. So now to set up Prisma, we need to install two packages. The first one is the Prisma CLI. So all I need to do is just run yarn add Prisma. This is a development dependency. And I will also need to install Prisma Client. Now, each one of these packages serves different purposes. The Prisma CLI is kind of like how it would set up kind of like our database and like the schema and our schema for the database. And for the Prisma client, it's like the set of functions that we're going to use to actually interact with the database. So let me just install that on add Prisma /client. And while that's installing, what we're going to do right now is use the Prisma CLI to kind of like set up our project, kind of like set up Prisma. While that's installing, we really
I
need
like that a lot
elevator
of these packages, I like that a lot of these packages, you simply add the package and then run the init command from their CLI. And, gone are the days where you have to configure everything manually.
Yeah, honestly, chef's kiss and great development experience. So if I just run npx prisma init, some magic will happen. Okay, so a couple of things magically happen right now. First, wait, no, what happened? Wait, let me just close all this stuff, collapse everything. Okay, so you'll find that there is a Prisma directory. This is where you'll find the schema.prisma. But also, we created a .env file, and here there is the database URL, and it will be loaded when we run Prisma. So actually, let me just get that and go to settings and then database credentials. Let me move that and click view credentials, and you'll find the URI and also has the password. Don't steal that. I'll delete it after the live stream. And yeah, so I'll just paste it here. And usually we just change Postgres to PostgreSQL. And that's really it. That's all we kind of need to do for our database. Now, what we need to do is just go to our schema.prisma. And this is kind of the heart of our Prisma setup. The first thing is this is where we will define our models. So our models are simply the tables in our database. So here we first are defining the data source. So we are saying that we're going to use PostgreSQL. If we're going to use something else, for example, MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server, we're going to change this value. And for the URL, here it's loading the database URL from the .env file. And then we're also specifying the generator. This is we're just going to use Prisma client. And yeah, finally, what we want is to define our models. Now, this is using Prisma's schema definition language. So it's very similar to GraphQL. And here you'd actually define the models and the relationships between these models. So actually, let me pull the schema real quick. Actually, let me just type something for you kind of to show it to you. So all I need to do is just say model and say contact. So I will have a contact model. Now, since we're big fans of type safety, you will just see a lot of squiggly lines while you're writing. But most likely they'll be fixed when you autosave, because we have a plugin for the syntax highlighting. So if you look for Prisma, you will find that there is a Prisma extension that you can use, and it adds syntax highlighting, formatting, auto completion, and actually shows lots of definitions. So it's super useful. Highly recommend it.
It's all about that dev experience.
Yeah, honestly, you'll see once we actually set things up, you'll see just how awesome this whole experience is. But yeah, so I want you'll see some red squiggly lines, and there is an error, and it says error validating the model. Each model must have at least one unique criteria that has only required fields. So what this is saying is that we need to specify an ID. We can't have a model without an ID. So if I go right here very quick, actually, no, let me try to do it without looking at anything. So if I would say there's an ID field, and I would say this is a string, and as you can see, there's auto completion. I actually typed incorrectly, and it's it can actually fixes it for me. And also I need to say that this is the default, and I will say, I believe, create unique ID. So wait, why is it complaining? And default create unique ID. Wait, let me actually pull up this schema, because usually I just rely on the documentation for this thing. Because yeah, I don't mess up. I don't want to mess up the models, because I would say you just do it once, and then you don't have to worry about it in the future, unless you kind of want to make changes. If you want to make changes, you would do a migration. But yeah, so okay, so what I forgot is to add that this is a unique field, and it says it right here, unique. Oh my god, I forgot to type unique. So now everything, it's not screaming at us, it's not complaining. But I also want to add multiple fields. So I want to have a name, a number, and an email. So I'll just add these here. And also, I want to create a user model. Now, since
Quick question.
I'm kind of sure.
Is the CUID, is that something that comes along with Prisma that they provide as a helper?
Cool. Yeah. So this is a helper for creating a UID. So as we'll actually kind of use Prisma Studio, which is a tool, really awesome tool to visualize your database and kind of make any changes to it. And you'll see that in the ID field, it's a UID. So it's a string with like different numbers and characters separated like by dashes. You can also have an ID that auto increments. You can also do that if you want. So yeah, it's super cool. I believe if I actually just delete that and I do like press Control Space, it gives me kind of like the different possibilities. So you have a one that is create unique ID, and then you have UUID. I'll just use like create unique ID. But yeah, now for authentication, I'll be using like NextAuth. NextAuth is super cool. It is like a library where it makes adding authentication to a Next.js project super easy, because all we need to do is just kind of configure an API route. I'll hopefully, if there's time, I'll get into that. But yeah, so to kind of like not waste time, like how much time is there left for the challenge?
We're currently at 32 minutes, a little over.
Wow.
32 minutes left.
Okay, so now the rest of the schema, this is for authentication purposes, is I defined kind of like a model for the session, a model for the account, and a model for the user. Now, there's actually one kind of like missing piece. Like, okay, so I created a model for the user because we want to have users and we want to store their information in the database. Technically with NextAuth, you can do passwordless authentication. You can do like something with GWT, but say for example, you want to own your data and you want to store it in your database. So you can just use the Prisma adapter. So we've collaborated with the NextAuth maintainers to support Prisma as an adapter. And you can actually use a lot of different ways for authenticating. I personally, I'm a big fan of authenticating using GitHub, and I'll configure like a GitHub app real quick for us to actually be able to sign in with GitHub. But yeah, so like
quick question: is Auth0 an option for NextAuth as well?
I believe yes. Like if we go to the documentation, wait, let me just pull this down here. It's right there. And yeah, in the documentation, you have the authentication providers. You have a ton of providers.
Quite a bit,
yeah, like I think almost every single provider, and the experience is really nice. Like I'm about to show you, but first let me just finish configuring this schema. But yeah, so let me go back here. Okay, so one important thing is we want to define a relationship between different models. So we have the contact. This is like a single contact. It has a unique ID. It has a name, a number, and an email. But this model needs to be associated with another user. So what we need to do is actually define a relationship. Now, in the user, we already kind of done that. We said that a user has contacts, and this context field is a contact and like an array of type contact. So what happens is if I save, like the Prisma extension should actually add this relationship, like between this relation between these two models. And like, let's see if that actually happens. And yeah, like automatically, it actually defined the relation. So as you can see, you have, yeah, it's really nice because sometimes when you're defining your models, you keep like forgetting something, but like it inferred that because you said, okay, a user has many contacts. So a contact should be associated with a user. And that's what's happening here. So now the contact, it is associated with a user. This field is optional. By default, all fields are required. And we're saying, okay, this relation is like connected by the user ID, which is an int. And this references this ID right here. So now we actually have two tables that are like connected to each other. And like down here, you also find different relations with like the account and like the session. But like that's like in the NextAuth documentation. And we also actually have like a blog post that is kind of similar to this this setup. So yeah, it's very interesting. But yeah, like also kind of like this at map name users. That's kind of like details. I won't go over these right now because like I want to try and complete the challenge. But yeah, so wait, I need to close this. Okay, so now the step is actually generating the Prisma client. But before that, we actually need to create it. So what I like to do is create a lib folder. In this folder, we will create our like Prisma client. Now what happens is you create Prisma client, you initialize it once, and you kind of import it everywhere within your project, so that like you only initialize it once. You don't do it like again. Like we will see how. So in this lib directory, all I'm going to do is just create a Prisma.ts file. Let me just copy and paste that so that we gain some time. And okay, so here. Okay, so what we're doing is we're importing Prisma client from the Prisma client package that we installed. We're defining a variable called Prisma, and it's of type Prisma client. And then usually what we would do is just export default Prisma and use it. But with Next.js, there's kind of like this snippet that we add because otherwise we kind of like exhaust like the database connections. And I believe that this is an issue that is a work in progress, but I'm not really sure. Like I'd have to kind of make sure. But yeah, this is kind of like what we need to do really. And now we have a Prisma client. Now, we added our schema locally, but these changes are not reflected yet in our database that we created on Heroku. So what we need to do is actually push these changes. Now, the way to do it is you actually run this command, npx prisma db push, push -- preview -feature. And what will happen is that two steps actually happen. The first one is like all of the models that we defined will now be reflected in the database. And also we will also generate the Prisma client. And you will see that it's like it lives in the add Prisma client and node modules. Actually, let me try and click it. Will it open? Not really sure. Yeah, like it's there. So in the client, you will actually see the different functions that we can call, and that's why it kind of like auto completes for us. But yeah, like that's a scary folder. Let's turn that. Let's close that. Yeah. So anyway, back to topic. So now our database has our like tables, but it doesn't have any data. We offer seeding, but seeding is when you have a database that is empty and you kind of want to add dummy values to it. This is very useful when you have a like a development environment. You don't want to actually use the real data. So, but like here, I'm just going to add it manually. So all we need to do is actually use Prisma Studio. So Prisma Studio, all you need to do is just run npx Prisma Studio, right? And then the magic will happen. And now it's running at localhost 45555. And what's happening?
That's nice.
Yeah, like it's just such a weird number. But like now, what you see, we actually I kind of like opened a new tab, and what you will see is we have all of our models. So we have a contact model, and these are the columns of our table. We said that it has an ID, it has a name, a number, an email, and it's associated with a certain user with their user ID. Now, since I'll be using GitHub authentication, but let me add actually this data. And like, we'll see if we have enough time or not. But like, say for example, if anyone has any questions, like since this is, this will take a couple of, a minute or something, feel free to ask any questions, like Prisma related, not Prisma related, like, yeah, just have fun, ask anything. So I'll just create a Mahmoud. This is like the contact name. And let's say the phone number is just anything really. And like the email is just, I don't know, Mahmoud at Gmail. And yeah, this is a contact. Now,
were you lucky enough to get that email, or is that just fake?
Oh, no, this is a fake email.
Okay,
like, I wish I could have had one, but no. So like what happens is, yeah, as you can see here, we're defining the relationship with the user model. That's why it's like capital U, like user, and it's user ID. So what we can actually do is, if we have users in our database, we can just click on it and select which user we want this contact to be associated with. It will be kind of like a list of checkboxes. It's really nice. But like so far, since it doesn't have any associated user, that's not really a problem. So I'll save changes. And now this is actually added to our database. Now, actually, let me create a user. But like the only issue is that
user. Sure. So if you're adding your contact, you're going to be the user, right?
Like here in this kind of like
in the
showcase
database,
of Prisma Studio. No,
yeah.
like now there is no associated user. like the user was optional. Of course, if I could have made then the schema for it to be like a required field, but then I wouldn't be able to kind of like demonstrate it. So like that's
Gotcha.
why I made option. But like, of course, it makes sense to like not create a contact without a user. But yeah, like you then just make changes in your like Prisma schema. But yeah, so like say I have a user, I'm going to create a user. I'll just add a record. I'll add like their name. Again, let's say Colby. And let me write your name correctly. Otherwise, that would be embarrassing. And then say Colby at Gmail. That would be a cool email.
I wish I had that.
Yeah, and then usually because this will be using GitHub authentication, it kind of like you get whether the email is verified or not, you get the user's image and you can like display it. And as you can see, we have here a contacts array. And you can see that it counts the type of like, it counts how many contacts we have, and it kind of like is connected to the contact model. So if I actually go here and press on this contact, I will see this different contact. I can actually select it and it will be associated with the user. But I believe if I actually do that, it might break and I wouldn't be able to do that. Like I'd have to create the relationship from the contact and not the user. But yeah, it just wouldn't change. But yeah, so like, anyway, let's just kind of ignore this part. This is kind of just to show you Prisma Studio and like what you can do. So what I want right now is to check if the authentication is working. So for us to do that, okay, let's go to index. First, we'll need to install, like, let me just kill this. No need for that. And turn this off. Okay, so NextAuth, all we need to do is just add NextAuth for us to use that. And in the pages directory, okay, so like, first of all, in the .env file, since we're using GitHub authentication, we're going to need two values from GitHub, the client ID of our GitHub app and the client secret. So I already have these, but like, if you want, all you need to do is just go to github.com/settings/developers, and you would just create a new OAuth app. And in this app, what you would do is you would specify the name of the app, its URL. And here, this is a very important part. You would specify that it's HTTP localhost 3000/API/auth, I believe. But yeah, like no need, I already have one configured. But once you actually configure one, you'll find that here you have two things. You have this client ID. And usually when you create it, actually, no, like when you create an app, you don't have a client secret. So what you would do is just you generate a new client secret, and now you can actually use GitHub authentication. So I'll just pull these values and go to my .env file and just paste them. Of course, since this is a live stream, I'll be deleting this app after because all of this stuff is like secret credentials. You shouldn't share your .env and you shouldn't like commit it. And actually, something that is very important to mention, by default, I believe the .gitignore does not include .env, and like the convention is to write .env.local, but like I'm just used to like just writing .env. So if you're using .env, just make sure you add it to like your gitignore. Otherwise, you'll be like committing your environment variables to your GitHub repo, which is not a best practice. But yeah, yeah, like it happened to me. So like that's why I learned this like the hard way, because I just like, it's just not env. Like there's no need to just kind of like, production and development, because I was like prototyping. But yeah, so like I defined the GitHub ID, the GitHub secret, and now in the API folder, there's like this hello.js. What happens is if we call /API/hello, we will actually get this data returned to us. I believe actually we can just test it right now. This is like API routes. So this will be an endpoint. If we work with Node.js and Express, this is kind of like very similar. So yeah, also, how much time do I have left? Is it like 20 minutes or something?
Yeah, it's just 20 minutes, just under 20 minutes.
20 minutes?
Yeah, did you hear that?
Yeah, like kind of like, okay, so it's API/hello. I should see like the data in front of me right now. Come on. Yeah, and like we get returned this data. So what we want to do is like, if you've worked with Node.js and Express, it's kind of like the exact same approach, but like inside this function, what we'll be doing is call Prisma client to create this data, to create new data, read it, do any type of operation to our database. And yeah, it would just work really by just fetching it. So like this is the conventional like REST API style. If you want to use GraphQL, I'm actually working on a demo. It's super nice. But yeah, like I'll be kind of like releasing that in the near future. So in the API directory for auth, what we need to do is like, I'll just copy paste this because this is like boilerplate. Go through it. Okay, so with NextAuth, what you need to do is just create an auth directory with NextAuth configured inside it. So if you go like right here, what you will see is you're just importing the Next API handler as a type, and we have this function auth handler. It's like the same. This is the function that will be called when we visit the URL, like NextAuth's URL, because this is kind of like a dynamic file. Like it's just very Next.js like experience with NextAuth. Like they made it like very simple to just add authentication. And now we're kind of like here configuring providers. You can have multiple providers, and we're configuring GitHub. So we're importing the GitHub ID and the GitHub secret from our .env. And we're also specifying that the adapter is our, like we're using the Prisma adapter, and we're importing Prisma client, the one that we initialized in like the lib folder. So yeah, that's basically it. And believe it or not, that is authentication done. Like if we go to our index page, let me just pull this real quick. Okay, so what we want is check whether the like login works or not. So let me just add this. You have a use session hook that checks whether a user is authenticated or not. And you have a sign in and sign out functions and a get session function. Now, the difference between use session and get session is that get session runs server side. So here we should actually define a function, export const get server side props equals async function. Yeah, everything works. And yeah, like what happens is when we actually request this page, Next.js can do any kind of requests to our backend. So for example, in our API folder or to our database, so we'd be using Prisma here. And then this, the return data from like our query will be available to us as props. So let me just, okay, first of all, let me just check that the authentication is working. So kind of like load this session. Like I'll be using, like I'll be passing a contacts here, and like this will be available to us in the get server side props. And let me actually just copy and paste this. Wow, like time flies. I thought it would be like much slower. Yeah, I would be like, whoa, what if like I finish early and I'm 100% sure that I finished late. And like I thought I'd go slower. But yeah, so okay, so inside this get server side props, what we're doing is we're calling the get session function. And what's going to happen if a user is not logged in, we'll just return like a 4 or 3. And for the props, what will happen is like we're just going to set the props to an empty array of like contacts. So yeah. But yeah, so now what's happening here is that we're saying user, okay, so Prisma here is giving us an error because it's not imported. So if you just highlight it, control space, it will be imported above, as you can see. That's really cool with TypeScript. Yeah. And now all I'm doing is just, like here, what I'm doing, this is Prisma client. So what I'm doing is I'm just awaiting this since this is an asynchronous function, and using the Prisma client, I go to the users like table, and I use find unique. Now, find unique is a function where you get only a unique value for a certain like row. So here we're finding the unique user by their email. So this actually reads like English. So what you're saying is Prisma find unique user where their email is equal to this value. So like session.user.email comes from NextAuth. So what's happening is, okay, we just, if a user is logged in, we don't have their email. And if they're logged in, we can get their, if they're logged in, we can get their email. And then what we want to do is like for the contacts, what will happen is we want to await like again, and in the contacts table, we will find many. So like find many is a function that returns all of the records And what's happening here is that we're filtering this record. So like, for example, if we just pass find many with an empty object, it will return every single record in our contacts table. But we don't want that. We want to return the data of like the user, because we know in the contact that and the contacts table that there is an association between a user. So here what we will do is that we were filtering like all the records to only return where the user ID is equal to the user ID. So like this user's ID. But like if we actually try to run this, there shouldn't be any errors. But the only issue is we won't be seeing any data yet because the database is empty. But yeah, now let's actually make it to check if a user is not logged in. So I'll just copy paste this here. Okay, so what's happening here, this session, we haven't called the use session hook. Okay, so like in this, here we have this use session hook. We can get access to the session. If the session does not exist, we will return a not signed in, and there's a button. This button has a function like an on-click handler where you can just call sign in. And this way you'll be like redirected to a sign-in page that has been like conveniently created for us by NextAuth. But if like there is a session, we will just execute this part right here. So let me just copy paste this here.
So that's what that sign-in function is doing. When you fire it, that redirects to a pre-configured page.
Yeah, like it would just be a page where like they sign in with GitHub. So it's very convenient. That's like cool. We'll see right now. I just need to import link. No, not that. Import link from Next.
And just to catch anybody up, so you put in there the code that will actually show the list of the contacts from inside the database.
Yes. So like here, what I'm doing is just there will be the user's image when they're logged in. So it's like session.user.image. This session comes from this hook right here, And then what's happening is I'm just adding some CSS to make it just around a picture with like a height of like 20 and height 20, like it's like converted by Tailwind. And then you will have a sign up button that when you click on it, you can just sign out. And finally, you have the contacts list. I'm checking that if there are no contacts, you will get, you don't have any contacts. But if there are contacts, this comes from our props like here. What's going to happen is we'll actually map over it and display the different contacts that we have. So let's actually try and run this. And finally, we have like a link to a /create page. Like I haven't created this yet, where you'll just have a form, and this form will just like on submit, we'll call an API route to create a record in our database. How much time do I have left?
You have a little bit over 10 minutes. I was going to update you when it hits 10, just slightly over 10.
Damn. I suck at challenges when it comes to time.
It seems like we're doing well here, though.
Yeah, like we're covering a lot of ground. Like this is a big demo. And like, as you can see, there are tons of features. Like technically, I could have just made it without authentication, but then it would not have made so much sense. Because if all users have like the same contacts, then it doesn't really make sense. Yeah. But yeah, so now, as you can see, we're not signed in. So if we try to sign in, and hopefully it works, you get this page, like it's /API/auth/sign-in. And all we do is just sign in with GitHub. And hopefully it works. Because I've already like used the same app. So I should be automatically logged in using it. Okay, so like here's my picture.
That's amazing. So it works. Like how easy it's just amazing to me that it sets up all that authentication routing like automatically.
Yeah, it's really nice. And if I want, I can also sign out. Hopefully it doesn't break like if I sign out and try to sign in again, but it should work normally. Like, so like if I sign in with GitHub again. Come on. Okay, and now you can see me. You see, I don't have any contacts. So now let me just copy and paste like the pages, like the create page. So if I go to pages here, I just paste it, and let's quickly go over what's happening here. So okay, so I'm just importing useState from React because I want to keep track of the state of like there are multiple lines. Actually, let me just show you instead of just talking about it. That'll be a lot easier. So like I compiled successfully. If we go to create a contact, it will take us to /create. And this is a very like amazing, beautiful form. Wait, let me actually add just a class. It's not necessary, but I have to. Like container, MX auto. For some reason, it's not working. But yeah, anyway. So I'm just using importing use state to keep track of the state of different components. Usually I just use like a form validation library like React Hook Form, because here there isn't any form validation. But what's happening is I'm just keeping track of the name, the email, and the number. And then I have a submit function. So like this is just the form. And yeah, so like in this submit function, what first I'm doing is just preventing the default behavior, because the default behavior of like a form when you submit it is kind of like refreshing the page. And then I create an object called body with the values of the name, email, and number. This will be the information that will be sent to our API route. And yeah, what I'm doing is just a try and catch, where first I will fetch /API/create contact. So let's actually create that.
So in that code quick though, so it's a pretty vanilla HTML form, and then you're just capturing the submit. So when somebody submits, it grabs that data and passes it through.
Yeah, and like since the API directory is just kind of like REST API endpoints, what you're doing is you are calling the endpoint, you're passing to it the like in the body, the different parameters. And what we will do is in the create contact file, we will check on these values, and then using Prisma, it will just be created in our like database. Hopefully I actually show it to you and have the time, but like we must do it. Like, yeah. But so like in this create contact, let me just copy and paste this real quick and kind of go over it as well. So here what we're doing is pretty straightforward. So we're just importing Prisma from the lib directory, this right here. And we have an asynchronous function. This is, since it's an API route, this function will be executed when we go to /API/create contact. And now what I'm doing here is I want to check first if the user is logged in. I will use that using the get session function. Since this is on the server, I'll use get session, not the React hook. And I got the session. And then I'm actually kind of doing the same logic that I did on like the homepage, where I kind of just want only the user that is logged in to create like the a contact. So what I'm doing here is I have the user. I'm getting this unique user by their email, which I'm pulling from the session. And then I'm getting, I don't need actually to log anything. And then like what I'm doing now is I go to the table of contacts and I'm creating a new like row, like when we visualize it. And we're passing this data. We pass the email, the name, the number, and the user ID. And actually, I believe we can just kind of get rid of this and just pass it as these values, since like they're the same name. It's cleaner this way.
And because we're initializing that Prisma client, like it already has the context of you being able to access the user and the contacts table from Prisma, right?
Yeah, actually, like when writing, like if I had the time, I would actually show you that you get auto completion while writing. So say, for example, const test equals await Prisma dot, and you will see that these four values are the one coming from our table. So you have the account, contact, session, and user, and say user and dot, you will see the different functions that we can actually use. So there are many, like I'll link our documentation, but you can update values. You can just retrieve single values by an ID, which is what we did above. You can update multiple values. You can
just so you know, like 5 minutes left.
Okay, cool. Like, well, it will work, but yeah. So like this is just to kind of demonstrate the development experience. But theoretically, I believe we're good to go. Like, of course, there's a lot of copy and pasting. So for me, it doesn't really. I'd be typing a bit more. But if we actually just add these values and say, okay, Colby, I don't know, this is like, wait, that's the email, right? So like, let's add my email, but like +2. gmail.com, and then any random number. And what's going to happen actually on submit, I didn't actually go over that part, we will redirect to the homepage. So we're importing the router from Next.js, and they all actually took care of routing. Now, if you use just React, you actually have to use React Router DOM to handle this part. So again, like great development experience with Next.js. But yeah, so now what's going to happen is we're just going to push so that it redirects after like we execute this fetch call. And let's hope that everything works. I think everything is saved. It should work. Yeah. So when I submit, what's going to happen, hopefully, fingers crossed, is we'll go to the homepage and we will find that there is a record that has been created in the database. It says not signed in for some reason. Then this means that things are not working.
Did you get signed out?
I guess. I'm not really sure. Wait, if I refresh. It works. Bam.
Oh, the contact's there.
So like,
it just took a second.
Yeah. I guess that's.
That's I wonder
reason.
if. Do you think maybe it didn't refresh the client? Like maybe it didn't refresh the list of clients when it redirected back to the homepage because it was client side redirect, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe. I think it should be like server side redirect. But like now we added like info, like the name, the number. Actually, let me just display the email. But technically speaking, now when you think about it, okay, so like I say, how many minutes do I have left?
Yeah, 2.5 minutes. But you completed it, so take your time to explain.
Okay, so like I say, like this way the challenge is complete. So like now I kind of showed you how to do it with Next.js. But the thing is, when you look at this code, Prisma is just the function responsible for manipulating the database. So if you're working, for example, with a GraphQL API, if you have experience with GraphQL, what happens is you have resolvers. So these resolvers are functions that will execute when you do either a query or a mutation. Like, correct me if I'm explaining anything incorrectly. But yeah, so like in this resolver, what we're going to do is just add this function and it will just work if you're building a GraphQL API. Now, if you're using Node.js, just JavaScript or TypeScript, this will also work. If you want to build a REST API like we're doing with Express, Happy.js, it also works. Like we actually have tons of examples. So wait, let me go to Prisma, wait, GitHub. No, time is running out. And yeah, wait, where's our GitHub repo? Like we have examples. Wait, let me just actually type Prisma examples. Yeah, like you have just ready to run examples of like a lot of projects. Wait, is this the wrong repo? I think am I in the right repo? Oh yeah, I'm in the wrong repo, I think. Or am I in the wrong? Wait, oh yeah, I'm in the correct repo. Phew. Okay, that would have been weird. So like, as you can see, first we have JavaScript and TypeScript examples. So if we go to JavaScript, you can see we have GraphQL examples, gRPC, which I honestly have no experience with, but apparently it's used to build backends. And you have like different REST, different REST APIs with different like libraries. You have with Next.js, even with Next.js. So if you're working with Vue, you can use that. Fastify, and also with TypeScript again, you also get tons and tons of examples. Like that's actually more. Wow. Yeah. Because we enjoy type safety. We think, as you can see, just great auto completion. And say, for example, if I think wait, let me actually try and not pass when creating this. And as you can see, there's an error. And what's happening? Like, first of all, you get documentation. It says here, the data needed to create a contact. And also, what's going to happen, it says, like you just get TypeScript error. And like when you check it, it just tells you, okay, there's a missing field. Now, this is happening because this is required in our Prisma schema. And if we have an optional value in our Prisma schema, it wouldn't actually complain. So like, for example, the user ID is optional. And that's why when we don't provide it, it's fine. Like for TypeScript, it says, okay, you're good to go. But yeah, so I guess that's it. Now, when you think about it and you kind of look at this entire example, the reason like I'm personally a big fan of Next.js is that, as you can see, the development experience is awesome. But if you want to use Prisma, you can, again, use it in any stack because it solves one problem and it solves it really well. And it's just interacting with the database. Now, there is one thing that I haven't mentioned, and it's like migrations. So like usually, say for example, I make a change to like the schema. I'm using like the db push command, but this means that it would just push the changes right away. But usually what you want to do is create migrations file so that in case anything like I think any issues happen, you can just roll back. So this is like a Prisma migrate. Now, this is not, this is a bit outside of like the scope of this demo, but like, we have great docs. So like make sure that you go to just prisma.io. I believe like right now you don't need to go through like the getting started guide, and you can just be productive and just go to the docs right away. Now, the documentation, in my humble opinion, I believe we have great documentation. So if you have any questions, you can just go to like the concepts, and you will most likely find an answer for any question that you have. Because I personally, when I feel like, okay, let me just check the docs first, and then I usually find, okay, it's just the answer is right there. But yeah, if
and we do
there
have
are
one
any
question
issues
though.
or something that you don't find, sure.
Yeah. So first of all, James said great work, and then we have, does Prisma have real-time query? Will Prisma have real-time queries in the future? Is that something that's on the roadmap? I'm not sure what real-time queries are.
I believe maybe like GraphQL subscriptions, my guess. But if yeah, then maybe I'm not really sure. Like I'd have to actually check with like the team. But yeah, like if you like oh yeah, so one important thing is, and like it's super cool, is our community. So we have a big Slack. I don't know how it has like 40,000 plus people. Like that's so much. And just go to prisma.io/community. And you can just join our Slack. You can ask questions, show your work, and be like the first to know about any announcements, because we actually just do like releases every 2 weeks. Like the team just, I don't know how they do it, but like the engineering team is honestly so badass. But yeah, so like I guess that's it. Hopefully you learned something new about like Prisma, what we do, and if it solves like your use case. I honestly had a ton of fun. I didn't know like an hour could go by this fast. Yeah. Hopefully everything was clear.
You did great though.
If you have any questions, feel free to like hit me up on Twitter or ask in our Slack community. If you have any issues, feel free to ask there. Like, yeah, like I also had a ton of fun. So like, thank you so much, Colby, for having me.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know what the next step is right now. So like, wait, I succeeded the challenge, right?
Yes, you did. You completed it.
Awesome.
Nice work. Nice work.
Thank you.
So yeah. So thanks to everybody for joining. I'd also like to thank you, Mahmoud, for taking the time to face off on Colbyashi Maru. Be sure to check out his courses on egghead.io and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Mahmoud, do you have anything else that you want to say?
Not really. I just this was a ton of fun. This was actually like my first time ever doing like a live coding thing, and I was like so stressed. Like I kept telling you, yo, I'm nervous. This is like my first time. What if like things don't work? And like it kind of did. Like there was a tiny hiccup with like the authentication. I was like, I'm panicking. No. But like coding. Things actually no great. Yeah, honestly, yeah. I don't know. Like it is much easier to just do like videos. Like like you have a YouTube channel, you pump out videos. It's just much more a controlled environment. Yeah, like less chaos. Like this is a bit too chaotic for me. I can definitely do it more. Though. Like it's fun. Yeah, like thank you so much. I honestly had a ton of fun. But yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, everybody. And next week, we'll have Khalid Garbaya, who will face off managing subscriptions with Gatsby, Netlify, Stripe, and Hasura. And this is Colby signing off. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.